Hi, everyone. I'm Konni Burton, CEO and founder of the Texan. Today, I had a conversation with Congressman Chip Roy, and it was a wide-ranging one. We touched on things such as border security, the debt, his battle with cancer, and then we touched on some fun things at the very end, such as who his favorite country music artists are. So thanks for joining us. I hope you'll enjoy the show. Welcome, Congressman.
Hey, Konni. Thanks for having me. This
Absolutely. I'm very honored to have you here. Just to give y'all a little bit, listeners out there, a little bit of background on Congressman Roy's district and a little bit about his race. So Lamar Smith was the Republican who held this seat previous, but decided to retire.
Yep, that's right.
And upon retirement, 18 Republican candidates got into the race to win that primary to go on for the general, which is amazing. And I remember watching some of the forums and those kinds of things and couldn't believe how many candidates were in that race.
We would get about 30 seconds of pop going down the stage to talk because you had so many people.
Amazing. So obviously that went into a runoff, and Chip Roy and Matt McCall were the two highest vote getters in the primary, and then Chip Roy won with 52.7% of the vote, went on to the general election and beat Joseph Kopser. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's right.
Joseph Kopser to win the seat. He is Republican Chip Roy, now congressman for Congressional District 21. And of course, as every district in Texas and probably other states too, the district is amazing when you look at it, and I'm looking at it right now on a map. It goes, which I was shocked by, kind of fingers up into Austin and then goes along I-35 down to San Antonio. I guess it's just on the west side of 35, it looks like, at least on this
Almost
map.
entirely. It crosses in a couple spots, but it stretches from downtown Austin, just south of the Capitol, all the way down through San Marcos, through New Braunfels, and down to Fort Sam Houston and San Antonio.
It's
and then way out west through the hill country.
Right. And then I was noticing, you have, of course, Kerrville, and then as far out west as Lakey. So
we get out to the Frio.
Yes, I love that. As a little girl, and I had my best friend's grandmother had property out there, and so I'd spend time out there.
Life is awesome. A lot better when I'm visiting the folks out in Real County.
No doubt. What a wonderful place to represent. It's beautiful. We get there as much as we can.
Very blessed.
So that's just to kind of give the listeners out there a little bit of an idea of the area of which you cover now. So familiarize our listeners with you yourself. What's your history? What made you decide to run for Congress?
Well, my family has roots in Texas dating back to the 1850s when my family came to the Dripping Springs area, one of the first in 1853. And my great-great-grandfather married my great-great-grandmother who was born in San Marcos. He went on to be a Texas Ranger in Hays, Blanco, and Travis counties. Family migrated all around the state. My dad, his dad was the chief of police of Sweetwater, Texas, out in West Texas. Unfortunately, he passed away of cancer. My grandmother then ran to become the first woman county clerk in Nolan County, Texas, as a single mom raising my dad, who was stricken with polio, and my uncle. And she'd get up every morning at 4, do all the therapy needed, then go into the office, do the hard work of raising my dad. He went on to become the first to go to college, which is a very quintessential Texan story. My mom was an Air Force brat. Her dad was lifetime Air Force, worked on Randolph Air Force Base. My mom grew up at Randolph, just outside of San Antonio as a kid, and hopped around like many of our parents and grandparents did. And so, I got into public service. I was a longtime Texan who actually ended up at the University of Virginia, growing up sort of steeped in Jeffersonian tradition and history, a belief in limited government. A lot of the anti-federalists of the time, the Patrick Henrys and the George Masons and the founding fathers in Virginia, and ended up coming to law school at the University of Texas and being closer to my family, which was great, and have been in this area for 20 years. And cutting to the chase, I got involved in public policy after having a career in private sector and banking and consulting because I wanted to shape things, but I thought it'd be temporary. The good Lord has a way of changing things a little bit, and these many years later, I'm still in public service. And as I think you know, when I worked for Governor Perry, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yes.
And came out the other end of that cancer-free now 7-odd years ago. And when I came out through that, I then had a 4-month-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, and felt like God had me in public service for a reason to save the republic for them and renew our commitment to limited constitutional government, and that is the best environment in which to exist freely and to have a prosperous life. And that's what I wanted to fight to do. So that's why I'm in public service.
Wow, that's amazing. So you said you are cancer-free currently. Is that correct? How many
Lord
years?
willing, yeah, that's right. So about 7 years.
Wow.
I was diagnosed in the summer of 11 while I was working for Governor Perry, and then went through treatment, literally bookending his presidential run. In fact, I went down and started treatment at MD Anderson the weekend he kicked off his presidential run in Charleston, and then he flew back. I had my last treatment, and he flew back from Columbia, South Carolina, to Austin, and we went visit him at the airport the day we had our celebratory Chip's Cancer-Free Day for the campaign. But it was great. It was I would crawl over broken glass for Governor Perry. He was a good man and treated me well.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're with us, and I'm sure that was a scary time for you and your family.
Yeah, it was particularly for Kara and
right.
The kids were too young to know. Now it's sort of this thing they talk about in general, but
sure.
It's rough on the spouses.
Absolutely.
For me, it was just another curveball that you get, and then it just makes you tougher when you come through it.
And then running for Congress is nothing compared to a battle like that, right?
Well, you joke, but it's serious. It puts in perspective. I'm not up there because I want a fancy title. I'm not up there because my life is going to rise or fall on it. Frankly, my life is probably better as a husband and father if I'm able to stay in Texas with my family. But I'm delighted to go serve and be in Washington to try to, as I said, save the republic for my kids and all of our respective kids and grandkids. And so it just puts in perspective that I'm there to win. I'm there to fight for limited constitutional government, to reduce the size of the federal government, to limit taxes, to limit the growth of government, to secure our border, to have healthcare freedom, to have a clear mission for our men and women in uniform, the tools they need and the care when they get home, and they get the hell out of our way and let Texas do our thing. And it's a clarity of purpose.
That's awesome. So, one of the things that I was thinking about beforehand was that after you got elected in 2018, you actually went to D.C. to a government shutdown.
I did.
Yeah. So kind of explain that to the listeners. Like, what physically, were you able to get a staff? Were you able to get an office? What kind of things happened? You just go to Washington and there's nobody. How many people are actually there? That kind of thing.
Well, would that we go to Washington, there'd be nobody there, right? Wouldn't that be something? Instead, we go there, and the legislative branch had, of course, funded itself. So there was funding for Congress. There was also appropriately, and I think happily, funding for defense.
Sure.
But what we were arguing over was, 6 or 7 other agencies and functional areas, including, of course, DHS, which had real ramifications for border security personnel, as well as TSA and Coast Guard and others that fall under DHS. So it had a real impact with real lives. We were asking people to show up to work on an emergency basis and not paying them, which was wrong.
Right.
As a conservative who believes in limiting spending and limiting the size and scope of government, we shouldn't ask people to show up to work and not pay them. Yet that's precisely what these folks in Washington were doing while they're running around preening about, border security on one hand, which was never really going to be about real border security, and on the other hand, talking about the need to fund the federal government when 80% of it was continuing to be operational. So, my belief was that we needed to get busy trying to be serious with the American people, that we need to secure our border, and that we ought to fund the people that were asking to show up to do their job.
So you've skipped over a little bit that you did serve as a staffer in D.C., so you've had a little bit of experience with D.C. What's the difference between actually being a staffer and now being a congressman?
I did serve as a lawyer on the Senate Judiciary Committee for Senator Cornyn from Texas and chief of staff to Ted Cruz. And as I mentioned, I worked for Governor Perry as well and Attorney General Paxton. The difference really is trying to figure out, well, there's 2 things. One, as a member, going to Washington and not staffing yourself is difficult when you've been a staffer. Trying to figure out how not to do all the things you think of, writing your own speeches, thinking about what you want to say and do, your own memos in your head.
Right,
so I think about those things in those terms. It's very helpful because I know what to expect. I know what I need. If I go to a hearing, I kind of know how to manage it without being highly prepped. but it means that I'm doing a lot of my own work sometimes.
Right.
But I've got a great staff who are working to deal with, I think, a difficult member because of what my expectations are being quite high. And then the second thing that's different is you see the belly of the beast in a way you didn't see as a staffer. You walk into rooms with members when it's members only, and you see members saying and doing things, as you well know from your own experience. You see things that you just really can't honestly believe is happening. That you can't believe the words that are coming out of some members' mouths. We were debating the Violence Against Women Act. And this is a bill that Republicans roundly opposed the version 4 or 5 years ago when it was being reauthorized. They roundly opposed it because it had significant problems in the bill in terms of the expansion of the scope of federal power, and because it had provisions in there dealing with definition of sex and things that were dubious. This bill then took it and exponentially made it worse, had transgender coverage in there, put in stuff in there that was going to restrict your gun rights and make it to where you have to go, you have no due process when your gun rights are restricted under red flag laws. And we had Republicans coming to the mic saying, well, gosh, I can't vote against this because it's called the Violence Against Women Act. It's like, well, what in the hell could you bury in that bill that would have you not vote against it just because they named it something? Yet that's exactly what Republicans are doing in a room in Washington. And that's the thing that's really frustrating to see as a member, that as a staffer, we had a sense of, but man, when you see it happening in real time, it's very frustrating.
Absolutely. So I don't understand, because this is a game that's been played for many, many years, naming legislation something that does pretty much the opposite of what it does. So why is that still affecting them with ways to get information out to the public these days, not through the lens of media, but, with social media and those kinds of things? Why would that worry them?
Because, frankly, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in particular, but members realize that if they name a bill such something like that, Violence Against Women Act, that if you oppose it, they'll beat the snot out of you in a campaign ad. So I can't wait. Clearly, Wendy Davis, if she gets in this race and runs against me, she's going to say, I clearly enjoy violence against women. Right? That's what she's going to say. Campaign ad after campaign ad. Chip Roy, he believes women, their violence against women should not be punished under federal law, or whatever.
Simply because legislation was named that, even though it didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, you can name any bill the, Save Women's and Puppies Act, and you can put anything in there, rooting out our core principles of freedom and destroying our country, and yet, you can't oppose that because it's got this touchy-feely name.
Right.
It's just wrong. And this is an area where Republicans fought, and then they cave, then they fight, and then they cave, and then they cave again on the original cave. I mean, it's extraordinary, and this is what's so frustrating about the current version of the Republican Party.
Well, and it's to me, if I can plug the Texan for a minute, it's a really good segue into why we exist today, because I think it's very frustrating for somebody to be able to call out another legislator like that, and then for that information to be repeated by media over and over and over, when in the end, that's not, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, right? Because certainly both sides do that to the other. And, what we want to do as a news source is explain really what legislation does, even if it does have a name that's different than what it says within it. We want to give the information to people so that they can make informed decisions. And so certainly that's what we're looking to do, is not just be parroting things that are said when there is no truth to them, which we see in the media a lot these days.
And by the way, I can't thank you enough for doing this. It's so sorely needed. We don't have in current media people who are taking the bill, ripping it apart, and explaining the votes in a way that people can understand why things are happening. And that's what's happening, particularly, I'm going to say at the federal and state level both.
Absolutely.
It's happening regularly where somebody sees a vote and they don't understand why it's happening. And in all of the noise, the truth gets lost.
That's right.
So that's, I think, the most important function that y'all can serve among many, but that's a very important one.
That's exactly what we want to do. And so I appreciate the opportunity to get to say that there. So you mentioned Wendy Davis. So why did you mention her? What is up? Are you hearing that she's going to run in your seat, or?
Well, there's lots of rumors, and we'll see.
Yeah.
She seems to be indicating an interest in running. And you know what, as I've said before, I'm going to keep doing my job. I'm going to keep doing my job, and espousing the principles principles that I know reflect the values of the people of the 21st Congressional District. That includes Austin, by the way. People like to say, well, you represent the Hill Country, you don't represent Austin. I got a whole lot of votes in Austin, Texas, and I think there's a whole lot of people in Austin, Texas who believe in liberty, who are being sold a bill of goods by a left who likes authoritarian decisions being made in Washington and sell it as liberty. And I think if Ms. Davis wants to get in this race, then if Democrats want to set a big pile of money on fire, then they can go ahead and do that.
Yeah. So your campaign, you focus on core issues such as border security and immigration, what you describe as healthcare freedom, and the national debt.
Yep.
So why do you see those three as such critical issues?
Well, I think unfolding before our eyes is the clear reason why we need to focus on border security. We had 100,000 people who crossed the border in March apprehended. That's not talking about those who were not apprehended. We know that cartels have operational control of our border. We know that a report came out yesterday saying cartels have made upwards of $2 billion trafficking in human beings, not narcotics, human beings. We're talking about stash houses in Houston where we had 54 people that were discovered paying ransom back to the Reynosa faction of the Gulf Cartel. We have dangerous narcotics like fentanyl, where a sugar packet's worth of fentanyl could kill everybody in a building. And we had 113 pounds of that coming in between the ports of entry. And we hear Democrats saying, well, all of that comes through the ports of entry. It doesn't come in between. That's a lie. It's wrong. And in fact, we've got massive numbers of narcotics, as we exposed in a hearing in the Oversight Committee, coming between the ports of entry. We have dangerous criminals coming across our border. We have MS-13 reaching up into our country. Tamaulipas, the state right across from McAllen, is a level 4 state according to our State Department. That makes it more dangerous than Honduras, more dangerous than El Salvador. It is dangerous because 32,000 people were killed in Mexico last year because cartels have control of that country and increasingly control of our border. It's wrong. We need to do something about it. The president is right to elevate that, but the president needs to step up and act on it. If we have an emergency, act like we have an emergency, shut down the flow. Don't listen to judges who are renegade judges in the Ninth Circuit saying they're interpreting some law. Go down, interpret our asylum laws appropriately, make a quick, credible fear determination of whether somebody's being persecuted, which is a tiny fraction of the people, and stop them. Turn them away, send them back to their home country, and then make people come to the ports of entry and follow our laws. We're either a nation of rule of laws or we're not. That's what I think we need to do on the border. Funding our government and budget, don't even get me started on that, because we've got people on both sides of the aisle who have no interest at all in an actual balanced budget. In our budget committee process, you saw what happened recently. Democrats wouldn't even put forward a budget because they don't care at all. But Republicans are no better. They're sitting in the budget committee, and what do? Well, we need to fund this amount for defense, but we know we're going to need to do this on non-defense discretionary because that's what Democrats want and some of our Republicans behind the scenes truly want. So, we're going to bust the caps, but blame it on mandatory spending. We'll go back and run when we go home in our state on the balanced budget amendment and the need to reform Medicare and Social Security. We'll never do any of those things, and we'll blow the caps again by another $150 billion. Meanwhile, we're racking up $100 million of debt an hour. We're at $22 trillion. And the state of our fiscal health going forward is laying on the hands of a president and a handful of us willing to say, guys, shouldn't we hold to the caps? And that's the state of things in Capitol Hill on spending.
So what is the answer to that? I mean, you are exactly correct, and we all know this. It's not one party that's created this problem. It's both. What is the answer? How are we going to get a handle on this? The
answer is the Texan. The answer is the people. That's it. We saw what happened in 2011 in response to President Obama's spend-a-thon, in which we had $1.234 trillion in deficit spending. The American people responded. We got caps put in place. We pumped the brakes, and deficits dropped to $300 to $400 billion. Now they're coming right back up, sailing to $1 trillion because they get hungry for their spending and they start busting the caps. Republicans in control of the House, Republicans in control of the Senate, Republicans in control of the White House busted the caps by $330 billion over the last 2 years. Those are caps, by the way, that when I asked Steny Hoyer in a budget committee, hey, Steny, I'm new here, so I don't come with any of the baggage or any of the expertise. But let me ask you this. Everybody here is saying we can't bust the caps, right? You're saying it would be terrible. I'm sorry, that we must bust the caps. We must bust the caps in order to spend what we need to spend for defense and non-defense discretionary. How much will our deficit be if we adhere to the caps? Well, it'll still be $1 trillion. So hold on. We're going to have $1 trillion deficit if we adhere to the caps, which everybody here is saying we need to bust further. That's the state of things. The hope is the people, coupled with some of us who have come in, driven by the people to go change Washington, will actually be a voice, make this known. You know what? It's having an impact. The president is doing some good things on spending. His advisors just last week said, you know what? Maybe the sequester should kick in. He's dead right. The sequester should kick in. Force a spending conversation. Force the hand of Congress to have to sit at a table and do what American families do every day, which is make tough decisions. How about guns and butter? You can't have all the guns you want to go prosecute wars all around the world endlessly and then go, oh, don't worry about it. All the butter you need too. It doesn't add up.
Right. Well, so, so all these congressmen that are up there, does this not worry them? This is what is so confounding, I think, to most of us that are sitting in our homes. I mean, just like you mentioned, we all have to stay within a budget. This is how much money we make. We can't just, borrow endlessly. But so do they not think of this when they're up there in D.C.? Is it just...
I think that what has happened is that particularly in a post 9/11 world, with, I might say, for some good reason, that we're dealing with the existential threat of terrorists who want to do harm, that we have then addressed that threat by having our men and women in uniform dealing with that threat. Some might argue now for too long. Some might argue that to what end now? But as a result of that, we've got a psychology now in Washington where Republicans in particular, but not just Republicans, Democrats too, believe they got to throw whatever they need to throw at defense in order to deal with whatever's happening in the Middle East. And oh, by the way, the increased threat in China and Russia. And they believe that then means we must do that at all costs. So then thrown out the window is the guns and butter argument. And if you couple that with the fact that nobody in America can feel the impact of $22 trillion of debt, they can't feel the impact of $1 trillion deficit. They just look at it and go, well, that sure seems awfully bad. And then they go back to taking their kids to school. And they go, well, golly, that seems like, well, I can't run my house that way. Yeah, I got to go to my job, right? They don't feel it. Healthcare costs going up.
Yeah.
Well, now all of a sudden that's in their pocketbook. They're going to revolt. They see an illegal immigrant kill somebody as a drunk driver down the street. They go, wait a minute, why do we have open borders? Those issues start to hit home. The deficit is something that leadership must address. And we have sorely a lack of leadership in Washington willing to say, we've got to, be responsible for the future of our kids and our grandchildren.
So you refer to the healthcare freedom is how you speak about it. So explain that to us, why you talk about it that way, and what do you hope to do in regard to healthcare in D.C.?
Well, what that is in response to is the increasing trend of Republicans to play on the field that the Democrats have set, where coverage is the deciding factor. And I'm sorry, coverage that is crap coverage is not a number that you want to be elevating as your marker, right? I don't care if you have 100% coverage if that coverage is terrible. I don't want the federal government being able to dictate to me and ration care. And by the way, if we play on the coverage field, we've already lost. Because single payer universal coverage means that. The Democrats are out there saying we want 100% coverage. We can't beat 100%. We have to be the party for innovation, for freedom, for opportunity, for choice, for the doctors that you want, for health sharing ministries, for health savings accounts, for having portable catastrophic insurance instead of losing it because you move from one job to the next. We have a system that was created because government interfered in the market with wage controls after World War II. Then insurance got tied to your employer. And then suddenly, when you move from one job to the next, you're worried about losing your insurance. The whole pre-existing condition problem, 90% of that is tied to that problem. If you break that down and have your insurance where you carry it, just like you do your life insurance, just like you do your automobile insurance, just like you do your homeowner's insurance, then you keep your insurance regardless of your job. You move from position to position in life, and you're able to care for it. Employers can still subsidize it through a health savings account, get the same deduction. You can do it as a self-employed individual, get the same deduction to create equity. You can go to a health sharing ministry, defray cost if you run into something you can't afford. Right now, direct primary care, access to health care, is crushing what you can get under insurance. You go to an insurance company and you say, well, how much for this particular procedure? Well, that'll be $240, but you've got a $180 copay. And oh, by the way, you got to go here and use this select vendor for your medicine. And you're talking to some 25-year-old dipwad in Nebraska who's then sitting there telling you, look at my schedule, that'll be $3,000. Meanwhile, you can go to a direct primary care doctor, that'll be $42.
Right.
I'll take your credit card right now.
Right.
And you say, well, what happens when you can't afford that? Well, if there's something you can't afford, which most people can, by the way, those kinds of things, when you go to your doctor and it's that affordable,
right,
then you can go to a health sharing ministry, go to your health savings accounts where you've got account building up and pay for it. Then you have catastrophic insurance for what it's supposed to be. When you hit your wall and make a mark on it, you don't go claim insurance. You paint your wall. You know, if you smash the window, you probably buy a new window, but you have insurance when your house burns down, when you're diagnosed with cancer, right, when you get in a bad car accident and you're in the intensive care for a week. Those are the things that can be crippling. We can have the iPhone 21st century version of healthcare like this. I want 1,000 solutions, not one top-down government solution.
If you'd like to hear the rest of my conversation with Congressman Chip Roy, go to the Texan.news/Chip, where we talk more about specifics on immigration, the national debt, and his experience as a congressman thus far. Thank you so much for listening.